Hello, this is Brad Wild, and sitting in front of you is the Bombardier Challenger 300 by dden. This is version 2. I just purchased it recently, done a couple of test flights, and this is the version that I've been waiting for. It does take into account X-Plane 11, so you can see the reflections that have been added. And the other nice feature is that it uses the default FMS. It would be great if it used something like the FMS in the Zibo 737 or something really immersive like the FMS in the A320 by JAR. But anyway, it's a big improvement and makes this airplane a lot more fun to fly, at least for me, and a little bit more immersive. Let me show you a couple of features that are unique to this airplane. There is a pop-out menu with half a dozen items on it. Fast Start does exactly that. It does the pre-flight, powers up the electrical system, starts the engines, and basically makes the plane ready to go. There is a pre-flight walk-around that you can do that requires manual removing of items. See, now it's green, it was red, and you can just work your way around the airplane. But I prefer to keep it simple, so I just click on Fast Pre-Flight and done. Starting inside the airplane, there are some preset camera positions that allow you to move around. Also, you have some animations. You can open and close the passenger door, emergency exit. I put up the shades. There are some, you can open and close doors. And if the electrical power was on, you would see monitors here. And you can open up the desks. Continuing here, instruments. Let's go back into the cockpit. The ECAS, well, it's because we don't have power, it's not going to show it to us, but it's basically whatever warnings and indications you would see here on the MFD. There's a checklist that you'll see in operation shortly, and then the MFD control panel, which we will use. Alright, one last thing, the options panel. You can set your volumes, and you can save your plane's position. It just leaves all the switches in the same place. Hide pilots, allow things to pop up, and reflections, and finally auto throttle. I've not been able to see any effects of this because the auto throttle is not in the actual airplane or in this simulator, but you can map a key on your joystick to use the X-Plane auto throttle. So I've done that. So we'll see what happens. So before we light the fires, let's do a little planning. We're going to be flying from Santa Barbara, Kilo Sierra Bravo Alpha, up to San Jose, an airport that I've flown into many times, which is Kilo Sierra Juliet Charlie. Most of you know, if you've followed me, that I like to go over to FlightAware and actually steal somebody else's flight plan, and I actually found one. This is a private jet that uses a SID, two transitions of course, and a star. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, head over to SkyVector, paste that into the flight plan, and you'll see that it plots it out nicely. And I just wanted to show you the SID that I'm going to be using, which is Gouch 1, and we'll be taking off to the south west. The winds are 160 at 7, and then over Cork Kinsey, then to Gouch, and on up the coast. And for our star, I'm going to be using Silicon 4. So our transition is Trox, and then we're going to be taking the east leg of this because we're going to be landing on runway 31 left. So we'll want to be at 15,000 and not or flight level 190. So you'll see how I make that adjustment on the FMS. I think that should cover it. We can just see all of the waypoints that we will be using, and hopefully all these will get plugged in nicely to our FMS. Okay, back in the cockpit. By the way, if you see any jumps in the lighting, I've had to do this over a couple of days, so I don't always get it perfect. So if you see any discontinuity, as they say in the biz, that's it. Alright, let's get things rolling. So we've got external power available. So we'll start with our battery available power. And that's about all we need to do to program our FMS. But I'm one of those people that likes to fire up the APU. That's all you do. It's a momentary switch. And you can watch it ramp up there. And once that's set, we can go ahead and turn on the bleeds, turn off external, which turns on the APU gen, turn off our standby instrument. Did I say turn off? Turn on. And how about some lights just to let people know we're home. And then all these go in the 12 o'clock position. Let's see. And this does as well. Here's our fuel. It just goes to auto. So everything is just straight up. We can turn on our probes later. Now let me show you what, let's see, instruments. So here's the ECAS with just all the warnings and things that are turned on and off, and we check that before we take off to make sure it's clear. Here's the checklist, and we could go through it bit by bit, but I just want to give you a quick overview without putting you through that. And then here's the what they call the FMD controller, and this is what allows you to flip through your checklists, and you can also throw different displays up on the FMD, which is kind of handy. You can see our APU is drawing fuel, and the electrical generator is driven by the APU right now. So it's very accurate that way. And while I'm down here, I'm going to turn off turn on the nose wheel steering. Took me a while to find that. And now I guess we're ready to take care of our FMS. So I'm just going to start with flight plan and put in our 2 airports. And let's see, San Jose. And we can also use this version as well. They both do slightly different things. In other words, they have different features depending on what you're trying to do. Let's put in our cruise altitude. It will add the FL in front. Now over to departure. And for a SID, you start with your runway. I always think you got to take off first, and then you need your SID and transition. And notice down here it's lit up, says execute. You don't get that in the standard FMS. You don't get that indication. So for our star, again, we're now landing, so we need our star before our runway. Silicon 4, trucks. So notice that our transition is here at trucks, and then we're going to make this fork. This is called A because we're going to be coming in from the south, landing on runway 30. So we want Clyde to be our transition. And if we look at our actual approach chart, Clyde is the very beginning of our ILS approach right here. Clyde, initial approach fix. So back to select Clyde and then execute. Sorry to jump back and forth. Now over to legs, and let's clean up what we can. So next page, we've got a discontinuity. You usually get that between transitions, Morro Bay and Trox. And notice we've got two altitudes here. A is again that route to the right, flight level 260. A, and place that in here. Go over to the next page, and we have another altitude discrepancy. We're taking A, so we want to make that 15000. So let's consider our FMS programmed. So what's next? Well, it's time to get things started. So let's just make sure that all of our knobs are in the 12 o'clock position, which they are. Of course, our APU is still running. Drop down to this lower part of the pedestal, and everything is in the right position. So before we start engines, these 2 toggle switches need to be moved to on or run, and then you just simply click that momentary switch and you can see the N1 coming up. Notice too that our generator is now green for that right engine. Now our left engine, and we can see that coming up, and notice it's white at this moment, and now it's green. We're going to leave our APU on, but we can use these other generators. They are on already. I always mess this up. If they're black, they're on. So we're just going to leave everything the way it is. We want to turn on our probes. Emergency lights are off, and we want to arm them. Notice our ECAS is slowly getting cleaned up. We want nose wheel steering on, and we can turn on our right and left engine bleeds. If I click this, it just turns it off, but we've got bleeds from the engines. So the next thing, let's just take a look at our upper panel here, and I'm going to put in flight level 330 or 30,000 feet. Whoops. And turn on our flight director. And I want to make sure that my nav source is set to the FMS, which it is. You can just toggle through these. On approach, we're going to flip it over to nav 1 so we can pick up our localizer. You can also check your V speeds. You can just cycle through here. And of course, you can set your radios down here. So you click radio, and then there you go. The larger button, you can see it selecting different radios. And right now our transponder is on standby. So we'll just leave it there for now. Let me just check the heading here. I want it, yeah, 15, because that's the runway we're going to be using for right now. And before we roll, about a notch of flaps here. And do I have taxi light on? That's what I want. So we're ready to taxi. Release that brake. Power up a little bit. By the way, if you find that the plane is not turning, the nose wheel is not operational, then you've forgotten to turn on the nose wheel steering. That little push button on the panel. I've got SkyMax Pro clouds, but I'm not using the real weather connector or internet weather, because I'm trying to replicate the clouds that were there when I first started making this video. It's not always possible to make it all the way through without a break, sometimes even a day or two. And all this is default scenery. X-Plane 11. And we'll pause here and take care of some housekeeping. Alright, let's do some standard checks here before we depart. So we want landing lights on, and then we can go ahead and turn on our strobe, and that's all we need from that end. Flaps are set, and our ECAS is clean, so we shouldn't get any warnings. So after I take off, I'm going to set my autopilot and fly the runway heading. until I get things under control. Famous last words, huh?
Approaching 1-5 left.
Alright, we'll just
on runway 15 left.
Line up and wait. One last thing I want to do is turn on my transponder. So you click the radio button and you'll notice the little rectangle around the frequencies, and you click over to the column that contains your transponder, and then use the smaller knob on menu data to get the appropriate mode. Next, release the parking brake. Apply some throttle, finger on the G key for the gear, toga on my joystick, and I'm watching the speed tape for V1. And there we go, V1 rotate, gear up. Then I want to click VS to hold my climb, then autopilot, then come back on the throttle to climb, and I'm watching my speed tape here, getting close to a point where we want to raise our flaps, but I can go ahead and click nav, flaps up, and I'm going to click flight level change and move this to 250. So we'll be climbing at 250. Now I could go and take care of a little housekeeping, turn off my landing light, and finally the APU. Make sure that my bleeds are on, which they are. And just take a quick look at our flight plan here. We are on route here. Let me see if I can change my range a little bit. There we go. So, coming up on Cork. So, one is busy on takeoff. So again, gear up, vertical speed, so you get the nose pointed in the right direction. Then I turn on autopilot, cut my throttle back to climb, and then flaps at the appropriate time, and then finally begin the FMS navigation and flight level change, and then you just watch your speed. So we are now at the point where we are past 10,000. This thing climbs like crazy, so we can go ahead and change that speed to something a little more reasonable. How about 290? And of course we can turn off our landing lights. And after the plane picks up that speed set on the bug, we begin our climb. One of the things you have to watch in this airplane is the overspeed, and you are bound to get it. But that little bar there, that little red bar, if it hits your speed, you're going to get a warning, and it can be really obnoxious. And we are coming up on Kenzie before we turn up the coast. Need to settle down there. Maybe stretch out our speed a little bit. And we've reached flight level past 180, so I can set my baro to standard. It doesn't say standard, it just puts the standard baro there. Again, watching my speed here. Notice climb indications here. We'll want to pull back to cruise once we reach flight level 330. Coming up on Gouch, and we can extend our range a little bit here. You do see the arch here that shows where we will reach our cruising altitude. So coming back over the coast, and a more gentle climb. We're at 2,500 feet per minute and coming down. Out the window. Turn on the music here. Little Vivaldi. Now, if you want to climb faster, you can always lower your speed, which will pitch the nose up. Also notice that our clock automatically starts on takeoff, which is handy. You can hear that music now. Vivaldi, Four Seasons. an interesting feature indeed. So we just got our warning that we're about to our cruise altitude. So now we'll want to come back, not just to cruise, but we're going to need to come back to about 78 or so. And I know this from experience. In fact, the speed is still slowly climbing. Might need to come back just a notch. Anything to avoid that obnoxious overspeed. Alright, I think that's it for right now. I'm gonna pause the recording while we get a little bit further along our path. Alright, we are coming up on Morro Bay, which is our transition from our SID, the last fix. Just 3 miles out. The next will be Trox, which is the transition to our star. So Trox is still 47 miles out. Not much out that window, and just California hills, very dry hills. We are coming up on our top of descent. It's a little bit ahead of Trox, which is our transition to our star. You can see a faint little green circle here. So I'm gonna go ahead and dial down my altitude. And I'm not really sure how this is going to work. I'm just going to dial it down a little bit because I'm going to use VNav and flight level change. Which is still a little bit confusing to me. I have read that at each level you have to re-click flight level change. The other option is just to turn off altitude and just go with vertical speed. But I would rather have it be controlled as much as possible. You know, when you're used to something like JAR, which handles it all, it's very nice. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up. And it's beginning the descent. And just to watch and make sure I'm reaching these altitudes at the right time, I've got this pulled up. So I need to come back on speed. Maybe add some spoilers. There we go. So at Trox we want to be at flight level 260. And notice that it has been set to 260. And the descent speed is figured by the FMS to get us there on time. And notice our arch is showing it right on the money. So as we get there, I'll click it again and see what happens. Alright, so we're at our altitude. I'm going to go ahead and click it again. Let's see, turn off altitude. Nothing's happening. Maybe it has to get to 2600 or flight level 260. Alright. See what happens. There we go. Click it again. And down we go. And we probably don't need those spoilers anymore. And we're now over the Salinas Valley, where a lot of your salad comes from. I've heard it called the salad bowl. Alright, and our next waypoint, Silicon, and we are to be at 200. And still 17 miles out. So we'll watch our speed, pull back on the power a little bit. Those spoilers are kind of handy, aren't they? I think I'm going to need them again. We're supposed to be at 280 according to the FMS. So at a higher speed we have to come down faster. So this will be an interesting trip down. Just have to pay attention. Well, I won't bore you with all the details, but I think you get the gist. There's our warning. Maybe we'll try one more together and then I'll just leave you until we get closer to picking up that localizer. So Valley, we need to be at 15,000. So it now says altitude. And I will click it and see what happens. Nope, not yet. I guess you have to pass the waypoint and then click flight level change. Alright, back with you in a little bit. Alright, our descent has worked out as I thought. You have to click flight level change a little bit after your last waypoint, and we are at 10,000. Time for some lights. And we need to decrease our speed. Need to be 250 under 10,000. And you can see we're coming up on Wilson. So next is Justy, and we want to be 4,200. And then Clyde at 4,000. So we've got a little time, but it does make me a little nervous to actually pass over and not be at that altitude. You don't see that in something like the JAR A320. So here we are at 8,000. And I'll click flight level change, and down we go. Yeah, it would be nice if that was automatic. So once you pass over it, it automatically resets. But it's not. So it really looks like we're going to be closer to Clyde when we reach that altitude. So I might have to cheat a little bit and switch over to vertical speed. So turn off VNav and increase our descent a little bit. Whoops, wrong way. I just want to be at 4,000 at Clyde. Maybe just a little bit faster. And the next thing I want to think about is changing my nav source to nav 1. And it's going to look for our ILS now. I'll click approach, pull up our localizer and guide slope bugs, and you can see that it's now armed. And this bar should swing across as we intercept that localizer. And you can see San Jose out in the distance. We can see our localizer starting to swing across. We are still under the guide slope, which is good. Speed is dropping as we level off. So let's pull back on those spoilers. And there we go. There's the localizer. Don't want to slow down too much. We're a long ways out. And now we just wait for that guide slope bug to come down. And our speed will pick up once the nose drops. Kind of hazy in the hills. And you can see our glide slope coming down. So we're still 13 miles out. So we should see this turn green. GS. And there comes the nose. So we've got the localizer and the glide slope dialed in. Come back on our speed. We're probably ready for a notch of flaps. That'll slow us down a little bit. Boy, it's really hard to see these. And we can check our references here. So 117 is our target, and we can start slowing down now. Get below 160, drop another notch. About 5 miles out for the gear. Notch of flaps. Gear down. Watching the speed. Final notch of flaps. Add a little throttle. And we've got 2 white, 2 red on our Pappy. Right over downtown San Jose, home of Adobe, a products that I use every day in my day job as a designer. Alright, speed is coming down nicely. Now general aviation is off to the left.
Minimums. 500.
Alright, we can kill the autopilot. Try to get straightened out here.
Glide slope. Glide slope. Glide slope.
Boy, they have you land quite a ways down the runway, don't they?
Glide slope. Glide slope. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
And reverse. And some brake. Stay in the middle, Brad. Alright. Reverse off. Would have been nice to get that first turn off. I probably could have if I would have slammed on the brakes, but turn off our strobes. Taxi light, just leave it where it's at. There is this general aviation runway, but it is no longer used, actually. So that completes our inaugural video in the Challenger 300. It took quite a number of tries to get it right, but I think I'm getting the hang of this airplane. It could use a more sophisticated FMS, and that would make it truly amazing. Nice Gulf Stream there. And instead of firing up the APU, I'm just going to go with the available ground power before shutting down. And engines off. Let's go to our animations. And so that concludes our flight. Thanks for coming along. And if you got any questions or suggestions, man, am I ever open. So thanks for joining me.